Eventually, if you are going to have to start supplementing in a lot of situations, and particularly, this year we didn't get a ton of moisture, and so our grasses are pretty dry and it's been pretty warm, and there's probably a lot of places where we could be using now, late in August, be utilizing some supplemental protein. When that protein level goes down and we start seeing really high fibrous diets, and you start seeing that stacking of the manure and that segmentation, that rate of passage is slowing down so much that they can't eat enough. And of course, we all know that cattle need pounds of nutrients, particularly pounds of protein and energy, and not percentages. So if they aren't able to get a couple of pounds of protein just to maintain themselves, and when you start getting into 4 and 5% protein stuff really late in the year without supplementing it, they really just can't eat quite enough of that really dry forage to maintain themselves and keep themselves in condition. And part of that has to do with the slowing of the rate of passage, and water would play a big part in maintaining that and keeping them in good health. The protein is the driving factor in our rangelands, in this part of the world. We have a lot of hard to get to energy out there, and the only way to get to it is by having that microbial population. And the fantastic thing about ruminant animals is being able to take that low quality fibrous forage and break it down and get to that energy that's in there that only they can utilize. The protein is the driving factor there. You will find at times that the energy might look a little bit off. If you were to sample some of this and send it off and look at the energy values in it, it looks a little bit off, but mostly it's due to the fact that there's not enough protein there to help drive that and pull that out of there. But at the same time, you can get to the point where the grass doesn't have, there's just nothing left there that even the microbes can really dig at and pull apart. So you can get into some energy deficiency, but it's most of the time it's due to the protein deficiency. So early on in the year, you'll see, as people are turning cattle out, particularly in this country in May and June, those plants are rapidly growing. They have a lot of water content. The protein is high in them as well. So at that time, you'll see manure that is very dark green, and like I say, it really a lot of number 1 and maybe 2 manure scores, but a lot of 1 where it's splattering. It's gotten, it's more like soup. That can be a challenging time of year for cattle because it's passing through them so fast that they're not pulling maybe as much nutrients out of there as they could. It's always nice to have a little bit of old standing forage to go along with that. That's a good basis for, general pasture health and maintenance and management, is to have some of that old standing forage that they can kind of work between the two and not just eating very fast, low growing forages that are going through them so quickly that they're having a hard time pulling or deriving any nutrients out of that. And then as things move on, we start hitting those forages start getting into their maximum growth, later in June, first part of July, and really maxing out. That's pretty much when we're going to see that ideal 3 score in the manure. It's a good mix of protein and energy, and the bugs are happy and the cattle are happy. And of course, in this country, that doesn't always last very long, and those forages can quickly go from that to a lot drier and mature. The protein content's coming down quickly in them, and it's changing over to more of a fibrous material that, again, we need more protein into the system to keep the bugs working on those low quality forages. And that just keeps continuing through the year until those plants become dormant. And then definitely when those plants are dormant, we need to take a look at supplementing some protein to them, because then we're in our range plants, then we're starting to get down into that 4 or 5% protein level that's just not quite enough. They really just can't quite eat enough of it to meet their requirements.
So it's a lot easier to maintain it than it is when you get behind the 8 ball to pick it back up. Especially like calving and breeding time. That is a really tough time to let a cow go downhill because playing catch up is really tough. People need to be checking their forages, kind of seeing what they've got for grass. Just because it looks good doesn't necessarily mean it is good. Protein is one of the things a guy's really got to keep his eye on, and as they talked earlier about just reading cow patties, I mean that is dang sure a pretty good measure. Kind of something I look at when I go out on a place, and generally their mineral package, and that again varies from place to place, and I think a good mineral package is extremely important. Like I said, I spent most of my life in the genetic and repro business, and I don't think a lot of folks understand just how important those micro minerals are to reproduction. And boy, you don't have to be off very far, and you're in a world of hurt. That's what you've got to use, what the good Lord give us, and you got to try to make the most out of it and get that animal as efficient as we can. You look at what cattle prices are right now. I mean, 1 pound is a difference, and if you can put on half, 3/4 of a pound a day more on a calf, when you go to sell them at the sale, that's a pretty big ticket. Yeah, and we do encourage people to use the tubs, and we also market the Redmond mineral and try to get them in the far corners and different places, and get those cattle to travel to them. And yeah, you can utilize your pasture a lot better. And if you've got the right tub out there, I mean, they'll eat some stuff that may be a little marginal, but because of the makeup and, like I said, the prebiotics, they're going to utilize that stuff, and they'll pull way more out of it than they would normally. They break it down better and get more nutrients out of it. We've actually got a tub that we use for weaning calves on, and we try, and if the cow's been on them, they learn from their mother, and it's just, and so when we put them in the pen, when we wean them, and the cattle just go to them, they stay quiet. We're not seeing coxy issues and that kind of stuff, and they're not running off a bunch of weight. I mean, we're not seeing that 10 days, 2 weeks period where they're kind of dropping off. They're just hitting the bunks and moving on and staying a lot healthier. And that's, I mean, it's just animal behavior. If calf will learn from their mother, and if you got the cow on it, the cow's going to do it.
You know, nature will provide a good amount of what we need for our cattle as far as protein and energy requirements and mineral requirements and such. Really, in a lot of our areas where we are grazing livestock, that doesn't last all year long. You know, eventually those forages and those plants become dormant and start lacking the needed protein and energy that they might require, particularly during high periods of production, late gestation, 3rd trimester, going into calving. In a lot of our area in the West, those forages are they're regrowing and becoming more palatable and highly nutritious as we're coming into the breeding season. But there are times during the year that we're going to need to supplement. We're just not able to intake enough of that dry forage or even stored forages to maintain the health and meet those protein and energy requirements. You know, one thing about maintaining good rangeland health and taking care of our rangeland that we've been given is to maintain a lot of diversity within those rangelands. That contributes heavily to being able to avoid a lot of other inputs by having to supplement too much during the year. We've got a lot of different plants out here. Some grow really early and go away quickly. Others come later, and we have a lot of variety between our native grasses and then native forbs that might be providing other energy and protein that we don't necessarily always take a look at when we're walking across the range and noticing what plants are there. Maintaining that diversity really helps keep the protein and energy requirements in check and can extend that grazing period for a really long time before we have to start going and finding supplementation. So it is key to take good care of our rangelands. Yeah, losing body condition scores is a challenge. You can easily lose a half a condition score in 30 days on really rough, particularly places where there's not a lot of plant diversity and they're only eating mostly one species. And it can happen a lot in some places where there's a lot of monoculture introduced species. It is really easy to lose a half a condition score, a body condition score in a 30-day period as these range plants dry up. It can happen more when there's not a lot of diversity and they're only eating one species or types of plants. Being able to maintain that body condition score is really paramount because it takes a lot of inputs to go back into her. She's gonna lose it a lot quicker than she's gonna gain it back, especially if she's got a calf by her side and there's a lot of stress, and she's putting a lot of her efforts raising that calf. So we really need to try to maintain those condition scores. It does take then harvested forages or supplementation to build that back up. So if we're able to mitigate that with just a little bit of supplementation here and there, when we do have the, when we are in situations where we can't quite maintain the diversity or the requirements that she might need for protein and energy, it's a little easier to supplement just a little bit. Keep that going, keep it at a steady rate instead of having to come back later, particularly later, especially in the winter time, as she's growing a calf particularly in this country, and trying to build her back up into good shape before calving or something like that. So it's always good to maintain that condition score well into the grazing season if you can.
Yesterday we started talking about supplementation, and I just want to continue that conversation and make sure we're thinking about supplementation critically. Now, I want to say first of all that it's a rancher's job to provide care for the cattle that are under his care, and that's of the utmost importance. That being said, I want to make sure that we're thinking critically and not putting production over profit. There comes a point in supplementation or substitute feeding when we're putting more dollars into the animal to get a diminishing return. So you might be excited about a 97% conception rate, but if it costs you more to go from 95 to 97 than those 2% of the calves are worth, it was a net loss. And that's really something that Good Grazing Makes Sense is all about, is working those economic factors into your ranching operation, because those are what drives the rangeland ecology and the management of public and private lands. If I need to get X% conception rate, that's my baseline, and then I start adding in costs. If I put in X dollars to get a better conception rate, will I get 2X back out of it, or X 0.5? And if the answer is no, then it's certainly just not worth doing, as long as the animal's needs are taken care of. I think it's much more important to start with your grazing plan and work your supplement plan based on that. I'll start with a grazing plan for the whole year, and considering time, timing, and duration, and knowing the phenology of the plant, when I'll start needing to supplement feed, and also taking consideration the timing of the requirements of those cows. So as forage quality goes down, if I know I'm coming into breeding season where I need to be on an upwards nutritional plane, then that's a no-brainer for me to start supplementing then. But I'll be very critical about how much I supplement and how much I spend on that supplement. There's supplementation and there's substitution. So supplementation should make a cow supplement this poorer quality feed, poorer than when it's green and growing during rapid stage of growth, versus substitute feeding, which predominantly in my area would be feeding hay. That's a substitute feed that's providing the appropriate amount of protein, or should be providing the appropriate amount of protein, and hopefully you've tested that hay and know that your macros and micros are in balance as well. And if they're not, then I would supplement my substitute feeding accordingly. When dealing with supplementation, we can use it as a really good tool for land management as well. And that's probably after cost, making sure that it's a cost-effective approach. The next priority is how I can use it to enhance the landscape. If I'm in an area where I know cattle don't get to very often, tubs are a great option for me to throw on the side-by-side and draw cattle into an area that they don't normally go to. Other options, liquid supplement is a great option, especially some of those companies that'll come out and they'll bitter it up or sweeten it up for you and back the cows off or increase their intake. That's a great use of. The added benefit is reducing your own labor from having to go out there and getting a very precise intake on your cows. Other options are blocks, which I use just like I would use a tub. They're a little handier to get into more remote locations. They fit on a side-by-side or a four-wheeler easier than a 250-pound tub. And finally, feeding hay is generally considered a substitute feeding, but I certainly have used it as a supplement where protein may be too expensive or I have an excess of high protein hay that I just need to supplement the grass with. And of course I'll back off the amount of hay I'm feeding, as it's just a supplement and not a substitute for what they're taking in. Along with using supplement to draw cattle to an area to get better utilization and appropriate utilization, it's certainly a good way to get them away from sensitive areas. I would never put any kind of draw towards a sensitive area or a riparian area or a place that they're already drawn to anyway. If you're gonna take the time to go move a 250-pound tub, you might as well get a few more acres of utilization out of it by drawing them somewhere else and taking them away from a sensitive area.